Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to Body Language Training. If we are meeting for the first time, my name is Simba. I'm the organizer and consultant for this community. And before we get started, I am super excited because today we've got a treat. Today is one of the sessions that I'm actually excited for because I actually get to be a student and actually learn from an expert in this field, and hopefully you can be able to get something as well that will help you expand your communication skills. So today, if this is your first time, welcome to the community. The purpose of body language training is aimed at helping you, providing you with strategies, tools, to help you increase your confidence and level of self-acceptance so you can communicate as the best version of yourself. This could be in romantic situations, in your business, in social situations. My goal with this community is to ensure that you have all the tools you need to be successful. If it is your first time, a lot of the events that we've had in the past have been recorded so that you can access them when you need them. If you have not signed up for our basic membership, I've put in the link in the website where you can access 9 of the past recordings we've had, and the current recording for today's session is also going to be available under the basic membership. And so within this community, if it's your first time, what you can expect is we have these events weekly so that you can refine the information that you're going to be getting. And when we are very lucky, like having someone like Adrienne come, we'll be able to learn new concepts, which will be super exciting. The other thing is you'll get access to online courses, which will be at the website where and the website that I put into the chat. There's also in-person and live workshops, as well as one-on-one coaching. Today is going to be an exciting day because I would love to introduce you my good friend Adrienne, who is coming for the second time to today's to present to us. And the first session was on conflict, on difficult conversations, how to move from conflict to connection. And in that session, we learned a lot of information about how to communicate in situations that might make us feel uncomfortable, how to communicate with people that may make us feel upset, or having those conversations that most of us tend to avoid. Adrienne brings over 25 years of expertise in interpersonal communication, conflict resolution, as well as leadership training. She teaches this in a private practice as well as through the Vancouver Community College. When she's not doing any of that, she loves to volunteer her work, working with the non-for-profit called Youth Empowering Youth. And she's got a whole list of certifications, including a certification as an NLP practitioner, as an emotional intelligence coach, as a conflict resolution, as well as a counseling coach as well. So I'm very grateful to have her here to teach us how to communicate more assertively. I know I struggle with this in trying to be super polite. So I'm going to give the floor to Adrienne, and then I am got my pen and paper, and I'm also ready to take notes. Welcome. And you can unmute yourself. I had muted you. Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for such a lovely introduction. I feel like you're talking about somebody else, but you're not. Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you all here. And those of you who have or are able to have your cameras on, thank you. It helps me feel so much more connected. It's a different format that we have now with our virtual way of communicating, and it's opened up so many avenues for us to connect. I love that. And at the same time, I also miss seeing people in real life. So I do appreciate it when cameras are able to be on, because I feel like there's actually people out there and I get to see your lovely faces. Assertiveness. Yeah, the art of self-expression and while allowing the same for others. I think this is for me, it's a very important component of what I teach and the approach I take to learning how to communicate assertively is doing so with an intention that if it matters to me that I'm able to be heard, to express myself openly, honestly, directly, ask for my needs to be met, you know, share who I am in this world, and desire someone else to place value on that and to truly listen to me, I need to be aware that that's what I need to create for others as well. And the approach to communicating assertively, which we'll talk about today, takes that approach. And it's a very important concept to maintain when we're practicing and learning skills and getting more out of our comfort zone and expressing ourselves more forthrightly, is that in order to be listened to ourselves, people need to be listened to, if that makes sense. People are much more open and willing to hear what we have to say and consider our thoughts and feelings if they've felt heard and respected themselves. So it is, that's why I titled this, While Allowing the Same for Others. What is assertiveness? Well, it has probably all sorts of different descriptions and might mean different things for certain people. But for today, we're going to take a look at, as I share my screen. Everyone can see that, can they? Yeah, cool, thanks. Is a definition of assertiveness. Assertive communication is the ability to express our thoughts, point of view, our desires, our feelings, honestly and directly, in a respectful manner of communication that also respects the rights of and encourages the same for others. It does require we hold the belief that we all have the right to be ourselves regardless of what others need or want us to be. And what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about why we struggle expressing ourselves openly and honestly. Like, really, why? Why do we struggle with this? Why aren't we all just going about our lives, expressing who we are, sharing our thoughts, our opinions? Why aren't we doing this? Why do we struggle with it? We're going to talk about that because there's some really valid reasons why we do. And the more we understand what contributes to who we are, two things happen. One is we understand our own behavior better, and that's often a key to starting to get beyond it. The other is that then we become more empathetic to the other human beings out there on this planet, because we realize that we are all struggling with this. We're going to talk about the differences between assertive, aggressive, and passive communication styles. Most of us, I think I could probably say, yeah, most of us, we use all three of these at different times. There are times when we're a little more aggressive. There's times when we're kind of passive, and there's times when we don't have a problem being assertive. And I'm going to add a fourth to this, which we will cover. And lots of people have heard the term passive aggressive. I call it more indirectly aggressive, but it's a big part of the style that we take on. So we're going to cover those styles. In covering those, it helps us become more aware of our own style that we use regularly, and what are factors in that that contribute to communicating effectively, getting positive results out of our conversations, and what contributes to them going off the rails. A lot of the time we're unconscious. We think we're justified in our approach and our behavior. We're going to talk about some common pitfalls that can turn self-expression into regret, and some ways to avoid them. And we're going to learn some assertive language concepts that increase your confidence and produce more positive outcomes for both parties. I mean, we are limited on our time today, so we're going to touch on these. We won't, obviously, you won't leave here with every skill and tool in your toolbox that that will help you suddenly leave this session and become the perfect assertive communicator in all situations. But we're certainly going to touch on some really key points that will help provide you with some insight and some self-awareness. Some important components, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute here. Some important components are to how to learn to communicate assertively are realizing that we all want meaningful, collaborative, uplifting, honest relationships, whether it's at work, in our personal lives, whether we know it or not. It's actually innate within us. We're born desiring and needing connection with others. It's who we are as human beings. But first, we need to gain a deep connection to ourselves. We need to know what truly matters to us. We then need to learn communication skills and language that support our ability to express ourselves in a constructive, more positive, less inflammatory manner. And when this happens, we actually begin to have more control. That's the cool thing about this, is once you start to learn what you're doing now that isn't working for you, and learn ways to communicate that allow you to express yourself in ways that also influence more receptivity from others. The wonderful thing about it is you actually start to gain more control in the outcome of conversations and in your relationships. And that's a pretty amazing thing. So then if we add gaining an understanding of neuroscience behind how our brains respond to our thoughts, why what we think really does matter, we begin to understand the importance of our relationships with ourselves and how that impacts our relationship with others and ultimately our life experience. Our relationships become deeper, more fulfilling, more productive. We experience less conflict and more alignment with those around us. There's 4, as we talked about, primary styles of communicating. We have passive, we have aggressive, we have indirectly aggressive, or often referred to as passive aggressive, and we have assertive. To define assertive communication skills, we really first need to understand what are the components of the other styles, and to start to become more self-aware of what ones do I see in myself. And so if we take a look at passive, what do passive behaviors actually include? Well, passive communication is a style that where individuals have developed a pattern of avoiding expressing themselves, their feelings. They avoid protecting their rights. They avoid expressing their needs. And as a result, passive individuals do not respond overtly to when their feelings are hurt, when they get angry. Instead, they allow grievances and annoyances to mount, usually unaware of the buildup. But once they've reached their high tolerance threshold for unacceptable behavior, they're prone to explode. They're prone to have outbursts, which are usually out of proportion to the triggering incident. And after that outburst, it's very common to feel shame, to feel guilt, to feel confusion. And so they return to their passive behavior. Why did I do that? I should have known. I never should have spoken up. I shouldn't have said anything. Look at what it turns into. And what do those behaviors actually look like? Well, passive behaviors is when someone stays quiet, when they're being criticized or treated unjustly. Not speaking up when someone leaves you out of a conversation. Going along with someone else's plans when you wish you were really doing something else. Saying nothing in a response. Keeping feelings to yourself. Hiding your feelings from yourself because you don't want to acknowledge them. Because if I acknowledge them, it might be too uncomfortable because I can't express them. Passive behavior is often dishonest. Involves letting other people violate your personal right to be treated with respect and dignity. It's indifferent. We often start to feel lifeless. And we often start to not care. Convince ourselves we don't care. We avoid problems, which makes it hard to solve problems. And that erodes confidence. So, if we're already not feeling confident in how to express ourselves openly and honestly, and we avoid addressing things and avoid solving problems, it actually starts to even erode more our sense of confidence. They have feelings like I'm not good enough, it doesn't matter, which really just starts building anger. Hopes that needs will be met. Hope. We hope our needs will be met, and we're really disappointed when they're not. Lacking confidence, apologizing for disappointing others, body language is shrinking, slouched, often a lack of eye contact, often fidgeting, moving around. So that's, if you can relate to any of those, I can relate. I can relate to everything that we're going to be talking about tonight on some level at some point in time, for sure. Am I way better than I used to be? Oh my God. Yeah, that's what immersed me in this training to begin with, was my inability to express myself assertively. So yeah, I can definitely relate to a lot of this. So if we take a look at aggressive behavior. Oh, and I meant to say, I love having questions, and I think sometimes that is what we all learn from the most, is when we ask questions, we share ideas, we share thoughts, we share experiences. It's difficult in this kind of a format when there's this many people and I have a certain amount of information to get across. But, if it's something that you'd really like to ask, stick it in chat. And I'm going to leave time at the end, so make a note of it. And I'll definitely try and answer people's questions. Aggressive communication. It's a style which individuals express their feelings and opinions and advocate for their needs in a way that does violate the rights of others. It's aggressive communicators who are verbally and or physically abusive. What are some of the ways that they express themselves? Yeah, they're yelling, accusing, blaming, teasing, interrupting. Anything physical directed at others is aggressive behavior. Rolling their eyes, smirking, being sarcastic, trying to dominate, making threats, calling people by names. Their body language is usually pretty distinguishable. It's not relaxed and comfortable and warm and friendly. It's tense. They can tend to get inside someone's personal space, their boundaries, where you start to feel like you want to pull back. They're intimidating. Their fists might start to get clenched. You'll see them tensing up. They may point their fingers. Aggressive is not in any way trying to create a respectful, open, encouraging environment for someone else to also express themselves openly and honestly. So, if anyone can relate to any of those, again, it's not, we'll talk about that more, but it's not that there isn't a time and a place for certain behaviors. What we're talking about is what your normal, natural, default way of communicating is. So let's take a look at the passive, indirect, aggressive. It's a style in which individuals appear passive on the surface, but are really acting out anger in subtle, indirect, or behind the scenes ways. People who develop a pattern of passive aggressive communication usually feel powerless, stuck, resentful. In other words, they feel incapable of dealing directly with the object of their resentments. Instead, they express their anger by subtly undermining the object or real or imagined of their resentment. I have passive aggressive characteristics. Full honesty here. I can relate to these. I don't like it. I'm not proud of myself, but I can. So indirectly aggressive, passive aggressive, subtle digs, talking behind people's back instead of to them directly. Put downs, often out of context. And you'll find this happens often in relationships of couples, where someone will be in a social setting and they'll make a dig about their partner. Oh yeah, well, so-and-so, they really like to do blah, 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 or they're really bad at blah, blah, blah. And it's not in context, it's not directly to that person, but it's clearly something that they find irritating. And so the opportunity that that passive aggressive person takes is in front of other people. Let's make a dig here. Let's point something out. It's not okay. That's not the way to do it. And if you've ever had that happen to you or you've ever done it, and I've been guilty over the years, then start to become aware of it. It's very eroding to personal relationships. because it hurts. People will do the silent treatment. Suddenly they're just not really talking or responding. Yet, when you ask them if everything's okay, yeah, no, everything's fine. It's obviously not fine. It's not the way to communicate with one another. It doesn't bring anything out in the open. Being purposely late, there's all sorts of ways that this behavior starts to show up. Saying things are fine, but the body language and behaviors are incongruent. Intentional mistakes. Hostile, underlying, or overt behaviors, but won't talk about it. Saying yes, then resenting others, feeling taken advantage of. Muttering to themselves, but when others can overhear, but when asked, well, what was it you said? Did you just say something? No, nothing important. Those kinds of behaviors. Not open and straightforward and get angry at others for not knowing or understanding what is wrong. Well, they should have just known. Wasn't it kind of obvious? I became very quiet. Very passive aggressive stuff. So, on to assertive, the one we really want to focus on. Assertive behaviors. Assertiveness is a style where individuals really clearly state their opinions, their feelings, advocate for themselves, advocate for their rights and needs without violating the rights of others. These individuals value themselves. They value their time. They value their emotions. They value their spiritual being. They value their physical needs. And they're strong advocates for themselves while being very respectful of and advocating the rights of others. That's assertiveness. What does it look like? They're confident in their abilities, or willing to go outside of their comfort zone. Because are we always confident? No. And if we're going to grow and try new things and develop and explore and experiment, we got to get out of our comfort zone, which is what we're talking about tonight. Anytime we're talking about gaining self-awareness, learning new information that we need to actually incorporate and practice in order to make the positive, constructive changes we want to make in our lives, we got to get out of our comfort zone. And that's not easy for us to do as human beings. In fact, our brain actually fights getting out of comfort zones. It likes safe, it likes comfortable, it likes what it knows. So that area of our brain that kind of, is the first part that reacts and responds to events is the part that just wants to keep us safe. And so we'll talk more about that, but that's something that we always need to be aware of. And so, unless we really have a legitimate threat, understanding that becoming really uncomfortable, our brains are kind of fighting against that. So it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a scary place to go. Anyhow, I get off track here. Assertive behaviors, respecting the opinions of others. This is not always easy to do, as we all know. The amount of things we see on the news and people in political positions and people who are expressing their thoughts and ideas, it's pretty hard to respect other people's opinions and stay open. And it doesn't mean we agree. It means respecting the right for someone else to express their opinions. If we want that same right, we have to respect the right of others. It's validating others' feelings, being good listeners, able to problem solve collaboratively, and willing to compromise if that's what it comes down to for the greater good of everyone involved. Ask for what they need directly, not by not talking and withdrawing and muttering so that someone gives in just to help you get in a better mood. It means actually being very clear and direct and saying, this is what I really need. This is what I really want to do today. This is what would really help me. Share their thoughts and opinions without apologizing. I'm sorry, but I disagree. You don't need to be sorry that you disagree. You can simply disagree. Able to say no. Listen and encourage the views of others, whether in agreement with those views or not, which goes back to respecting the opinions of others. Accept responsibility for their own actions. This is a biggie, especially if we've done something that, wasn't necessarily fair, or may have been somewhat hurtful, or may have been somewhat selfish. There's all sorts of times when, we're not the perfect human beings that everybody might like to be, which is actually never possible. But when you realize that your actions have not been maybe as respectful as they could have been, being able to say, you're right. That was an exaggeration. And I was saying that just because I was feeling hurt. That takes confidence, and it takes assertive skills. Able to apologize, we just talked about, if it's a legitimate reason. And when I say unconditionally, we often, when we apologize, if there's been a conflict, if the other person has also done things that you feel they should apologize for, which is not unusual when we get involved in an escalated conversation and emotions get involved, is if we are going to agree, if we are going to apologize, then just take accountability for your decision to apologize for your behaviors and your words. It's not conditional on that other person apologizing. And that's not easy to do. Able to delegate to others. Able to hold others accountable. Express themselves openly, honestly, without feeling anxious. Solid, congruent voice tone. Can maintain eye contact. The body language is calm, it's at ease. Well, distance, respecting other people's space and their boundaries. Those are components of assertive behavior. Does anyone nail every one of those all the time? I'd say no. But it's important to be aware that this is actually, these are the components, and to be able to look at yourself and say, how much do I do that? How often do I do that? Do I ever do that? Okay, so why do we develop the styles that we develop? Why did I incorporate some passive aggressive behaviors? Why do certain people adopt an aggressive style of communicating? Why do people just end up being fairly passive and not being able to express themselves? Well, you come by it honestly. We program our brains through our thoughts and our beliefs, and these impact us emotionally and physiologically. How we think impacts how we internally process events, which also impacts our emotions and determines our behavior, which ultimately again determines our experience in life. There's Newton's theory of relativity, action and reaction. For every action in nature, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So what we put out, there's going to be a response to. Our brains became programmed at a very young age. So when we talk about, now, how did I become who I am? Why do I have the behaviors I have? We come by them legitimately and honestly, and most of them now are so ingrained and habitual and unconscious that they're just who we are. And then we wonder, why did that not go so well? Why am I in another one of those relationships? And we feel often justified in how we react and respond. Whether it's justified or not, whether it's potentially an overreaction or not, we feel justified in our right to act the way we are. As children, we're extremely influenced by our world around us. And our brains are literally sponges that absorb at an incredibly rapid rate. And this starts, well, they say pre-birth, the day we're born. We all desire to be accepted, to be part of a community. That's hardwired into us, is to be part of a community. To be seen, heard, and most of all, safe. We're vulnerable and dependent on those around us, our caregivers and any individuals of influence or authority. We're totally dependent on them. And if you think about the fact that we come hardwired needing to be part of a community, and the reason for that, from what I understand, is back when our survival depended on it. You know, if you were hunters and gatherers and you suddenly were outcast from the tribe and you're on your own, you're not going to live. You're just not going to live. Like, we are hardwired to be part of community. We feel safe in it. That's why one of the primary, most destructive behaviors of bullying is outcast. It's a huge fear to not be accepted, to not belong. So we come with these needs as infants. And since we innately have a strong drive to be safe, and our brains are there first and foremost to protect us, we're always taking cues from our caregivers and the world around us. And those cues come in the form of the body language we see in others, the words others speak, emotional vibrations that we pick up on, and they're big, actions, withdrawal of action. One of the most scary things for human beings is to be outcast or ignored. And thousands of years ago, it meant death, as we talked about. So as a result, we're always searching for and reacting to what behaviors result in a positive response from those around us. What results in them not being happy with us, with what we've said or our behavior, or at the least what we interpret as them not being happy with us, because we make up our own stories as children. We make up our own stories as adults. We draw conclusions I don't know if you're familiar with the ladder of inference, but what that all is about is how we take a fact, which might be words someone says, actions we see someone make, and then we create a whole story around it. And that story becomes truth to us. And then we react and respond emotionally and behaviorally to that. And half the time, we have no idea if that was the motive behind what someone did, if that was what their behaviors meant. So we do this as little children, definitely. Understandably, we're trying to make sense of our world around us. So if a child is sad and crying because they need something, or they're hurt, or they're scared, and a caregiver gets angry with them and says, quit crying, you have nothing to cry about, then you're starting to develop a pattern of how to deal with your emotions and your needs. You want that person to be happy with you. You want them to accept you. And you might develop a belief that our fears or wants or sadness isn't appropriate to express. And it might receive a negative reaction from someone who I depend on. If I needed and craved attention by asking for it in a positive way and that didn't work, and the only way I got it was through acting out and being negative, getting angry, throwing tantrums, then that's how I'm going to learn to communicate, to get my needs met. As children, all we want is to get our needs met, to feel safe and secure, to be seen and to be heard. So if you consider that, and you consider the behaviors that we've just talked about, which is the assertive or passive aggressive or aggressive, we come by this stuff honestly. We adapt to our needs that we need to survive. We also learn from what we see and hear and feel. So we learn from what's role modeled around us. If how we saw people communicate with one another was yelling and name calling and throwing things, that's what we're going to learn is an appropriate way to communicate. So we come by all of this stuff very honestly. And then we make decisions based on what we're told, what we observe, and what we decide to place as meaning to events. We want to be accepted, we want to please, we want to feel good, and our world revolves around the responses we receive from those primary adults around us. Much of what we decided to believe and adapt our behaviors to then, it made total sense. Total sense. But you're not a little child anymore. You're not little children. And that's where the self-awareness is so important. So some food for thought. What is your current toolbox? What's your current communication skills toolbox? What did you take with you as tools from your childhood into adulthood? Because what worked for us as children were valid, based on getting our needs met and being accepted. We adapted to survive and feel as good as possible. But is it up to date? Do any of those tools actually need sharpening? Do you need to throw some of those tools, outdated tools, away and purchase new ones, learn new ones, practice new ones? Yeah, you can be guaranteed There's some that need sharpening. There's some that just should be gotten rid of. There's new ones that you should be getting. You need to update your toolbox. If you really want to thrive, have control, have better relationships in your life, more joy, more confidence. So we talked about how you can use these skills at different times. Why do you think we would use different styles? And I know I'm throwing it out there as a general question to everybody, but if anybody wants to, I don't know, can people unmute, Simba?
Yes, they can.
It can, cool. Okay, so if anybody has a comment regarding that, like why and when do you think you might use different styles? We've talked about passive, aggressive, assertive.
Maybe raise your hand so that we know who's going to be speaking and it's organized. Antoine?
Antoine, did I see your hand up? Cool.
Yes. Yeah. I believe because you have to know your audience as well as yourself and know how you come across. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give me an example?
It depends on if you're speaking with your friends or maybe, I would say I speak differently than I would if I was with my friends than I would with my family members. Sometimes depending on the setting, so if we're just out and about and certain things are going, along, I'm more, I would say more open with certain people than I would be than, with my family member than I would my, so it depends on the audience I'm speaking with at that particular time.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. Anybody else have a thought on that? Patrick?
It depends on if you're the position you're actually in. If you're in, say, a employer position, if you're the employee, you have to be more authoritative, that kind of deal. So you kind of deal different situations by the people you're actually talking to. So
Yeah.
I was kind of,
Yeah.
I guess it's just a continuation of what the other person said. So.
Yeah, no, but yeah, you've expressed it in a different way, which always adds clarity. Absolutely. And so, I mean, if anyone else has something that they'd like to say, by all means, please pop your hand up. It's going to depend on the situation. One of the things I always like to clarify, because I don't want people leaving a session like this with some confusion or misunderstanding, is when we're talking assertive communication, which is all the things we've talked about, which is expressing yourself openly and honestly, and asking for what you need and all that stuff, disagreeing if you don't feel that you agree and you want to express it. It's also, as both Antoine and Patrick have mentioned, it's knowing your audience, knowing what the outcome could be if you do, like if there are certainly situations where the repercussions of, even if you're respectful in how you communicate, the repercussions of expressing your thoughts and your opinions in certain environments it could result in an outcome that doesn't work for you. You've got a boss that, or you work in an environment and a culture where that culture really isn't open and receptive to people expressing their thoughts or disagreeing. You need to be aware of that for sure. But what's important is that you're aware that you're making a conscious choice, and that conscious choice is for a valid reason, not just because it'll be uncomfortable, and not just because potentially, if it's my friend or my partner or my spouse or my kids, that there might be some conflict as a result. Conflict's good, conflict's healthy. It deepens relationships. But you do need to know what the repercussions could be and weigh them out. So if you're looking at your job becoming incredibly uncomfortable from that day on, because that person that you've decided excuse me, to express yourself openly and honestly with is in a position of higher authority, and they're not going to like it, and they're going to make your life miserable, and you really don't have a way of changing that, yeah, you're probably not going to speak your opinion. And you're going to weigh out, you know, how long do I want to be here? Do I need to be here? Can I adapt to it? Because there's tons of other really good things about it. Like, but we're talking awareness, and we're talking choices that are made consciously, and that your reasons aren't just because it's going to be uncomfortable for me because I'd have to get out of my comfort zone. Same as, you know, there's relationships that where the other party is very aggressive, is volatile, is, you know, where you're potentially looking at being uncomfortable and possibly being afraid. And, you know, it's being assertive isn't no matter what, expressing your thoughts and opinions. But it's knowing if you're not, and that's your go-to style, and that you're using it regularly if you're being passive or you're being aggressive, and knowing that that's not going to get you the results of really positive, productive relationships and allow you to start to have more control in your life and feel joy, feel freedom, feel all those things that we're all really craving and wanting in life. So, yeah, it depends on your confidence level that day. You know, there's times when I am totally confident, grounded, centered, able to express myself very clearly. And there's other days I wake up and wonder where the hell that person went, because today I'm just not feeling quite that level of confidence. So this is about, you know, giving yourself a break too. You are humans. We're humans. We're not perfect. And I always like to bring that into anything when I'm coaching or I'm doing workshops or whatever I'm doing, is that, you know, it's easy to start to put a lot of pressure on ourselves when we start to become more self-aware, and those things become highlighted, and it's, well, this is really the way I should be communicating. It's something to be aware of. It's something to strive for, and it's definitely worth it. I embarked on this journey of conflict resolution at least 25 years ago. And I didn't have to, but I took on a role of leadership where I had about 35 women reporting to me and a couple of assistants. And there was a really, really ugly bullying situation that had been going on in this environment. And I got to tell you, those bullies were pretty intimidating. I was intimidated. I'm like, I do not have the skills to deal with these women, but I have to deal with these women because the situation is not acceptable. And so I decided I should take some conflict resolution training, and I got hooked. Honestly, I got hooked because it started to change me and my life and my relationships. So,
We have a question in the chat.
do we?
So, yes, two
Great.
questions from Tom and Jennifer.
Jennifer, any tips for those not naturally assertive to take steps to work towards this communication style? Oh, tons. We're going to talk about a little more about, you know, some ways to start to work towards this. So we'll get towards that. And then if you, at the end, like I said, I'm going to give some time for questions, come back. with more. I mean, as I said, this is a presentation of information. It's not a training session. It's not a coaching session. So there, you'll be able to take some tips and suggestions, but you're not going to shift totally after this. You're going to have your eyes opened and you're going to get some desire, I would think, to want to start to learn how to do this better. And there are definitely skills involved. So I teach these courses. Well, I coach and I deliver these courses myself, but independently, but I teach for Vancouver Community College. And, you know, there's a lot to learn, but there's some really cool things. So here I get off track. There's some really cool things that you can take with you initially, and we'll talk about those. So great question. And what was the other one?
Tom's one, can you be one way to some people but another way to others? Like passive aggressive to one person, but maybe not to another person.
I don't know. You tell me, can you?
I'll leave you to answer that one.
I would say, if you're asking the question, that you're maybe realizing that you are that at times. Absolutely. Absolutely. As I said earlier, we take on probably all four of these behaviors at times, depending on the circumstances and the situation. Depending on our confidence level, depending on whether we feel intimidated, whether we're triggered. So yeah, absolutely.
And last question, it
Yeah.
came to me directly. How do I deal with my brother who is aggressive in behavior with me, as I'm financially dependent on him since I'm getting my visa to start working, but he can also be so caring and gentle with his wife and children? That's a
Well,
lot.
that's a loaded question. Do we have a couple of hours? Okay. How do you deal with him? Oh, gee, you know, that's tough to go into right now.
Maybe they can book a meeting with you after and kind of share.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, you can. Like, I would love to follow up with you and have a conversation. I'm going to leave my contact information. Those are those things that we kind of alluded to. I alluded to earlier, which is picking and choosing and knowing, you know, our situation and to what extent we're able to sort out how to deal with it and maybe accept it in the time being, what isn't acceptable, our reason for choosing to maybe avoid or, you know, not express ourselves fully. There's all sorts of things involved in that, but it's not a nice place to be. It's hard. I can only imagine how difficult that situation would be for you. And if you want to follow up with a conversation at another time, as I said, I'll give my info. You can always book something with me on my Calendly link, or just email me or give me a call. We can talk about it more, because there would be some things that would definitely ease, I guess is what I'd like to say, ease that stress somewhat, for sure. So what's required in learning how to communicate assertively? There we go. Share my screen. You have an awareness of your current primary style of communicating. My original primary style of communicating was passive / passive aggressive. I know that, and I still have passive aggressive behaviors that I am working on. And It's interesting once you start to become aware to go, why is it so hard for me to let go of that? You know, but you have to become aware of your current primary style. You have to have a very strong desire to change how you communicate currently. Because this takes time and it takes work and it takes getting out of comfort zones. I will never stop saying how worth it is, though. It is, you're worth it. Your life is worth it. Your relationships are worth it. You have to have an overwhelming drive for honest, open self-expression. Sometimes that gets buried if we have really not practiced it for possibly our whole lives. But you really have to have an overwhelming drive. You have to truly want to change how we show up and the state of your current relationships. You really have to truly want to change that. You have to be able to be self-aware of your internal obstacles, those unconscious, conscious things that get in our way, that are often unconscious. And even if they are conscious, we're maybe not skilled enough yet or confident enough yet to start to remove them. We'll talk a little bit more about internal obstacles, what I mean by that. We have to learn and practice assertive skills and language. You have to learn it and practice it. There's no other way. We often, as I talked earlier about, as we're children, none of us come from some perfectly role modeled environment where everyone was the perfect, assertive, respectful, used perfect language and how to speak to one another. None of us grew up with that. And we all grew up on varying levels of dysfunction when it came to how people communicate and relate to each other. So you got to learn this stuff. You got to go, okay, so what would it look like and sound like if I was to express myself in that situation assertively? I don't even know what it sounds like. I've done lots of leadership coaching and consulting over the years. And, you know, there's so many times when I'll be with someone consulting them or coaching them, and they'll be trying to talk about a situation that they're going to have to deal with, and they're not looking forward to it because it's challenging. And I'll start to talk about how they could approach it, and they're just like, oh my God, I have to write that down. Like, stop, I need to write those words down. And the reason that happens is because it's not how they're used to talking. It's not how they're used to hearing people talk. So yeah, you have to learn stuff. You have to be willing to be humble. You have to begin to let go of your ego. You got to let go of your image of yourself, a role that we've created for ourselves that we feel protected in. And that's not always easy to do. So when you embark on this journey, and again, I'm going to say how worthwhile it is, because you actually feel really good about yourself when you are able to be honest and you are actually able to drop your ego and say, you know what? I suck at this. You know what? I cause a lot of this problem that I'm dealing with. You know what? I realize I can be flippin' passive aggressive. And damn, I don't like admitting that because it's not nice. It's not a nice way to communicate. It's passive aggressive. It's giving people silent treatment. It's embarrassing as I learn about it. But is it? Or am I just a human being that learned a dysfunctional way of communicating And okay, so now I know. And now I can make changes. The more comfortable we get admitting who we are in all aspects of who we are, our positives, our negatives, the quicker we learn to be different and the quicker our life shifts. We have to have the ability to admit being wrong, apologize, open our minds to understanding others. These are important components. So, what gets in our way of doing this? What did I say? Ineffective communication skills. We don't know how to communicate skillfully, assertively, confidently in all situations. We may in some, those easy ones, those ones where we don't feel intimidated. We need self-awareness and we need self-management. We need to know, and by self-awareness and self-management, it's not to be confused with having a deep understanding of what caused our triggers in the first place. Because half the time this stuff happened at a really young age. And so when we have triggers or we react to things, we don't really know why. In fact, we usually think we're justified. So we'll get into that a little bit more so that I explain it, I guess, a little more fully. But our beliefs get in our way of communicating assertively. You know, what's our belief about our own personal rights? You know, if we grew up in a situation where, which I certainly did on different levels, that I didn't really have the right to express myself openly and honestly. Certainly, if I disagreed with my mother, I didn't get a good reaction. And so I started to certainly incorporate a belief that I didn't have the right. My thoughts and my opinions didn't matter. So we need to really look at our beliefs. And I do this exercise in a lot of the courses or even just coaching, which is, it's called my personal Bill of Rights. And it's going through a list of, I have the right to, and then really looking at and going, geez, do I believe I have the right to do that? Our reactions to others, our triggers, we need to start becoming aware of what our triggers are. And our triggers set us off. So we store things from a young age. And if my thoughts and opinions weren't valued, and I wasn't listened to, I am going to carry that with me. We all do. Because innately, as human beings, we all have a driving need to be heard, seen, validated, and respected. It's our nature. And so if we don't get that when we're young, it's something that we're still needing and craving. And what will happen is we will often, not always, but often overreact in certain situations when we feel like we're not being listened to or valued or respected or heard. When you look at a situation like road rage is a trigger, big trigger, you know, seriously, because someone's cut you off. You're going to chase them and tailgate them and potentially cause an accident for a bunch of other people because they cut you off. That's out of context. It might really tick you off and make you angry, but you're going to drive along and go, oh yeah, well, that guy's a jerk. Thank God he's way ahead of me now because he's out of my way. That's a more appropriate way to deal with it. But when we have triggers, we overreact. And a lot of the time we feel very justified. So we need to start becoming aware of our triggers. So what are yours? What sets you off? Triggers are usually unconscious, but can be conscious. And they're causes for us to react inappropriately to situations. And we'll react with defensiveness, blame, anger, avoidance, interrupting, not listening, tuning out, leave the situation totally, just walk away, criticizing, attacking, apologizing when we don't mean it or have a legitimate reason, sarcasm, denial, incongruent words and our body language, dishonesty regarding our true thoughts and emotions and opinions. These can be triggers for us, and they can be how we ourselves react and respond. So you need to start to become aware of what are your triggers. And so someone had asked, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but you had asked about how some tips and skills or something. There's something that we call the gap. Oh, that's not the gap. That's me. Not there yet. Oh, I thought I had a slide on this. Okay, fine. I'll just talk about it. The gap is that space where, kind of go back to Newton's theory, but it's when an external event takes place, whether it's someone's body language, whether it's words someone's spoken, whether it's something that we've observed, there's a gap between that event and when we react or respond. It's in that gap where the magic can happen. And what I mean by that is that's where we have a freedom to choose how we're going to respond to that person. That's the time when we can catch ourselves and take a breath. And there are skills that are involved in what to do there. You want to pause and you want to breathe, and then you want to listen. Because seeking to understand before being understood is probably the golden rule of relationships and communicating assertively. So when you're listening, I thought I had a thing on this. I apologize because
They might be out of order because it looks like you've got 2 more slides after slide 12. If you keep going after.
Thank you, Simba. Beautiful. I'm going like, what the heck? I know I wrote this slide. Okay, beautiful. So how to avoid pitfalls and communicate assertively while respecting the rights of others. Catch yourself before reacting. It takes practice, and you're not always going to do it. So remember, everything that we talk about here, don't strive to be perfect and then beat yourself up if you aren't. Realize after the fact that, damn, I didn't catch myself, and that probably would have been really beneficial before I responded. So catch yourself before reacting. Know your triggers. Start to understand what they are. I don't like being cut off. That's a trigger. I'm much better because I've really had to practice at not reacting, but I don't like being cut off. And then catch yourself in that gap. We're responsible for our actions, and we all have choices. So you've got a stimulus, your external event. Before we respond, we have a choice. There's a gap and we choose how to fill that gap. Our choice will determine our response. Our response will determine, to some extent, the circumstances. We take responsibility for how we react and act. Responsibility is the ability to choose your response. So what you want to do there is you want to start using some in that gap, some good listening skills. And listening skills isn't just listening. Active listening skills includes attentively listening, watching body language, focusing in on what's being said, asking questions. Okay, so I'm not sure I know what you mean. Could you give me another example? It means using skills like paraphrasing and summarizing. So when you're in this gap and you need some time, and if we apply the seek to understand before being understood approach, if you really truly want to understand, as much as you might be just going off like crazy inside your head and emotionally. Now remember, your brain, I shouldn't say remember, I don't think I even talked about this. Your brain, everything from an external event goes through a part of your brain before it goes anywhere else. And it goes through your amygdala. So it goes through that part of your brain that's determining whether this is safe. It can't get up here. It can't get to where your rational, intelligent, reasoning ability, it doesn't even get there until it goes through that other part of your brain. So if you're triggered, the chance of you reacting rationally, respectfully, calmly, as intelligently as you're capable of is pretty much gone. You need to use this gap and take some time to slow down, calm down, allow that other part of your brain to start to become more accessible, where you can start to more rationally and calmly and intellectually respond. In the meantime, you want to understand, really understand what's going on for that other person, as hard as that is sometimes. And trust me, it's hard, especially if someone's elevated and escalated and triggering you. But the ability to say, okay, help me understand. You seem really upset right now. What's it about? I want to understand what's going on for you. And if someone starts to talk, bringing in skills like paraphrasing and summarizing are really important. And by paraphrasing, you're simply restating what they said. Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying is it really upset you when I ate the last piece of cake in the fridge? Off the top of my head. Really upset you when I ate the last piece of cake in the fridge? Yes, it really upset me. I thought you knew that was mine. I've been saving it. I couldn't wait to get home and have it with my glass of wine or whatever. Okay, so it was really important for you. You were looking forward to it, and you came home and I'd eaten it, and that really upset you. What we've done here is we haven't said you're right. We haven't said yes, the way you spoke to me and exploded and blew it all out of proportion. We haven't said any of that because we've taken our time and we've listened and we've helped that person realize that we're listening and that we want to understand. And so by the time it comes back to our turn, the chance of that person being open and receptive and really listening to us is far greater than it ever would have been if we had just reacted back. And this is what happens so often, is we get caught in a loop. It's how someone's communicated to us that we're now going to respond to, not why they're upset or what it is that's taking place for them. It's how they've communicated it. And so when we start to practice communicating assertively, once we've taken some time, allowed the other person to talk, vent, whatever, it's not always an extreme thing that's taking place from the other person. That's when our own assertive language skills comes into play. And when we're talking assertive language skills, we use I language. We don't talk about how, because you did this, I feel like this. It's about, I feel like this. So we're running out of time here. As you can tell, this is a very broad topic. And my intention for tonight was really to provide you with an overview and some food for thought and some awareness and insights into what holistically is assertive communication, especially while we're respecting the rights of others. And how did we become who we are? And what are some ideas, tips, suggestions, insights as to how you can start embarking on this journey that really, truly does have an impact on how you feel about yourself and the relationships that you experience in your life. So I'm going to stop. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to give you, first of all, my contact information. Let's share this. Oh, I know what I'll also do. I'll put this in chat.
I can do that.
Okay, I was going to put my link, my Calendly link there too. That's the only thing I was going to put into chat was my Calendly link. But if you go onto my website, my Calendly link is there. So if you wanted to book a 30-minute chat with me, by all means, do it. My website right now it's there, it's live, you can access it. It's in the process of being, I'm adding some content and broadening things. You'll see a lot about leadership training and coaching, which I do, but it's not all I do. So yeah, by all means, feel free to reach out.
We have some questions.
Cool.
In the chat.
Awesome.
The first one that came up was, where and how do you start change as a passive communicator?
Where and how do you start?
Where and how, do you start change as a passive communicator?
Okay. Where? I would say take on something easy. Take on something easy. Do not embark on the biggest, most excruciating relationship. Don't go there. Take something easy. Take something fairly safe, and start with your relationship with yourself. Starting to build your sense of worth that you have the right to express yourself fully, honestly, who you are. those would be the first two. If you're just going to start, I would start doing that. And, you know, go on some, if you're just wanting to, at this point, gather information, you know, go on the internet, go on some sites that talk about, you know, assertive communication skills and some of the language, you know, if you're not looking at actually, you know, immersing yourself in some coaching or training or something at this point. Yeah, that's what I would suggest would be your very first steps.
The next question is, how long does it take for a passive-aggressive person to change their communication style?
Well, if we're talking, you're talking, I'm assuming everyone's talking about themselves because we can't change anyone else. So how long? Gee, I couldn't even begin to answer that. It would depend on how entrenched someone is in it, how self-aware they want to start to become. It depends on those other things that I covered in that slide, which is you really have to seriously have a desire and the intention to change. You have to be willing to be open and honest about yourself. But in my opinion, change can happen pretty fast. Change happens in an instant. The minute we decide that we're going to change, that's when it starts to happen. And the minute you apply one good skill and remove a bad one, it's starting to happen. So it happens instantly. To the extent, hard to say. But what's cool is the minute you start to make one change, how you feel about yourself shifts and the results shift.
Perfect. And then the next one is, what tips do you recommend for us to slow down, reflect, to respond assertively? For example, you mentioned being more aware. What tools do you recommend for us to become more aware? You might have talked about this, but one of the questions.
Well, I think one of the first ones is looking at those behaviors that I had outlined and listed different behaviors and seeing, do I connect with any of those? Do I see myself in those? And then think about, you know, how do I deal with certain situations? You know, if I've got somebody who, you know, what really bugs me? What really bugs me about somebody else, if, you know, if I think about it and then start thinking about, well, why does it really bug you? Is that potentially a trigger? It's becoming more self-aware from that perspective. Looking at whether, you know, when a situation hasn't really resulted with the outcome you'd like, reflecting on that and going, okay, so what happened there? Who was I there? Who did I bring to that? Did I contribute? So, you know, and ask somebody. If you've got somebody, like I said, like these are things where, you know, you don't want to just go out there and try this on the most difficult, challenging relationship, but ask people. If you dare, ask people, how would you describe I communicate when, you know, in certain situations? If you got a good friend, you know, say, so how do you think I deal with conflict?
Perfect. And then the last one, just I know we're a little bit over, but this is so good. It's almost like we're trying to get every single information from you. Anne asks, how does one hold other people accountable?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to come up with an example in my head. Okay, now I'm making it, and if you want to unmute and give me an example or ask me the question, please feel free to do that, because I'm kind of winging it here. because it does depend. If this is something that between yourself and another person, you're both aware of, that's something that they had committed to, then it's simply saying, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you about the fact that you didn't follow through with this, or you told me you're going to pick me up at 8 o'clock and it's 1/4 after. And I'm really disappointed, or help me understand. I use that statement a lot. Help me understand. It's actually being able to really believe that everyone is responsible for their actions. So if they're responsible for their actions, if they've said they'd pick you up at 8 o'clock and they're consistently late, it's being able to say, I just got to tell you, this is really frustrating for me because I'm ready and I'm always sitting here waiting. And I actually feel kind of disrespected. And so I need to talk to you about the fact that you're late. Because they're responsible for that commitment of a time that's set, that you've both agreed to. You're holding up your end of it by being ready. They're not. And so we often struggle with actually expressing that, because they might get upset or they might get mad at us. And the only reason they're going to get upset or mad at you is because they don't want to hear what you're saying. And so, then often someone will come up with excuses and, well, it's really hard for me. Well, then, okay, so going forward, how do we set the time that you're going to pick me up? Because it doesn't work for me to be waiting. There's nothing disrespectful about that. There's nothing that you're saying that you don't have the right to say. You didn't not stay accountable. You didn't break a commitment. They have. Clear, honest, direct, respectable. And what you'll start to find, this happens a lot in the workplace. I consulted management for years. And they'll be like, oh man, like this person never gets their stuff done on time, or they never get to work on time, and I've sat down and talked with them, and it's like they have trouble catching the bus because blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, so then ask them, knowing they need to be at work by 8 o'clock, how are they going to deal with it tomorrow? How are you going to deal with it? It's for them to sort out. That's holding people accountable. If you've had an agreement to begin with and both people are aware of that agreement, then when you really logically look at it, it's very straightforward. If they were not aware that you wanted them to be at work at 8 o'clock, totally different story. But if they are, then they're accountable for their actions. If they can't get to work at 8 o'clock, then that's a conversation. And that's what I would consult to someone in that position. I would say, then if they're going to tell you I just can't do it, then you're going to have to, then you need to say, well, we have a problem. Because when you took this job, you knew the starting time was 8 o'clock. So hopefully you can figure that out. It's simple, and it's not simple. I'm certainly not trying to belittle the challenge. I've found it challenging at times for sure, but that's really, to answer your question in a straightforward way, is it's being honest, open, straightforward, asking to understand why someone hasn't been accountable for their actions, and then how are you going to deal with it going forward? Okay. Any other burning questions before we sign off here?
Well, I think we're getting a lot of thank yous. I know when I speak on behalf of everyone who's here today, this was an amazing session. Like
Oh,
super
thank
amazing,
you.
super insightful. Has, I'm assuming everyone, us thinking like, oh, might have some work to do on ourselves. So thank you very much for taking time out of your day to share your expertise, sharing it with the community. Of course, your link, people I'm assuming are going to be signing up. The recording video will also be available. So if some of this information you want to revisit it, that will be available to you. A question came as people loved your slides. Is that
Oh,
something that they'll be able to also access?
absolutely. So whatever you think is the best way, I can send the file to you, Simba.
Okay. So what
Okay.
we'll, yeah, we'll add the recording as well as the slides available there, and you'll be able to access both of them. And of course, if you've got any questions, don't ask me. I'm a student in this stuff. Book a meeting with her because I'll be just as confused as you. Okay.
And I'd just like to say thank you all for being here, because you've already taken a really big step to wanting to be more self-aware, does the desire to learn. I respect it and I value it, and I really appreciate that you're all here and that you listened to me for 90 minutes. But no, I do. I want to acknowledge you for being here.